A cold and wet winter's day greets us here in the small town of Summit, Oregon. Through the standing trees, we can hear the sound of engines working hard, and in this case, those belonging to the Portland and Western Railroad. It is here in Summit that we find them cresting the highest point on the Toledo district as they make their way eastward towards their destination of Albany, Oregon. Arguably the most rugged line operated by the Portland and Western Railroad, this 75 miles of challenging iron crosses over Oregon's coastal mountain range. From Albany in the east to Toledo in the west, trains traverse steep grades, with the greatest being a 2.35% slope on the west side of the summit. Following both the Yaquina and Marys River valleys, the route is beset with many tight curves and numerous timber trestles. Filmed over a period of 3 years, we will follow multiple crews as they make this 75-mile journey. Along the way, we will pass through historic towns such as Elk City, Chitwood, Eddyville, Nashville, Summit, Blodgett, Harris, Philomath, and Corvallis. As we do, we will also explore the line's history, dating back to the 1870s when the first rails were laid down. Most of what is visible today finds its origin from the line's time under the Southern Pacific to what we see today under the Willamette and Pacific and Portland and Western Railroads. As the train continues eastward with its loads of paper products, we will start our journey 37 miles to the west in the town of Toledo, Oregon, today's western terminus of the Portland and Western Railroad's Toledo district. Lying on the banks of the Yaquina River, Toledo sits 5 miles inland from the Pacific Ocean. The town is named after the city of Toledo in Ohio by a homesick settler who arrived here in the 1860s. Toledo was once home to a thriving port and multiple lumber mills served by the railroad. Today, only a couple industries survive, with the port still in use by shipwrights. Of these, the most notable and sizable industry is the extensive Georgia Pacific Pulp Mill, which has been the main reason for this line's continued existence, and indeed has been the largest customer on this line for over 80 years. A mill was first built here in 1918 by the U.S. Army for producing lumber from nearby spruce and fir for the manufacturing of airplane frames. After several owners, the site was bought by the Georgia Pacific in 1951, who in 1957 built a new mill on the site for the production of pulp and paper products as part of their expansion from lumber production. With over 400 employees, it remains today as one of the largest mills of its kind in the Pacific Northwest. The mill consists of 2 distinct areas separated by Depot Creek. To the east is the pulp mill itself, where wood chips and recycled paper are turned into fresh pulp and linerboard. To the west is the wood chip unloading facility, where wood chips are brought in by rail and dumped via a rotary dump inside the facility. Wood chips are also brought in by road, as well as logs, which are processed on site next to the unloading facility. A large covered conveyor transfers the chips to the mill, bridging Depot Creek and connecting the 2 parts of the mill complex. The spiral fins along the conveyor are a feature designed to diffuse the forces of strong winds that can rush upriver. The railroad still has a notable presence in the town of Toledo, with the Portland and Western Railroad maintaining the original Southern Pacific crew depot, along with extensive sidings around the mill and waterfront, with a small yard to the east used for staging outbound cars. Operating across 6 days every week, the Portland and Western Railroad uses 2 crews, with the first bringing the train to Toledo and a second for the return run to Albany, referred to as the Patch Crew. After arriving in Toledo, depending on the crew's hours, either the inbound or outbound crew will hook on to the outbound train prepared by the local switcher. On some occasions, they will need to collect outbound boxcars from the mill and empty wood chip gondolas on the other side of town. Added to that, on an as-needed basis, they will also drop off or pick up centerbeam cars for the other customer in Toledo, Western Cascade Industries. This is done at the transload siding located at Wheeler, just east of the town. Switching duties for the mill were once performed by the Portland and Western Railroad with a 24-hour crew based here in Toledo. Since then, duties have been contracted out to the Watco Rail Company, who keep 2 locomotives in Toledo, swapping between them when they need servicing. The crew here is on call throughout the week, but can generally be seen moving boxcars in and out of the mill facility and to and from the various storage tracks throughout the town. They will also spot the wood chip cars at the unloading facility on the other side of Depot Creek. Tied down on a spur next to the wood chip unloading facility, we see one of the switching units, number 3021, a GP30 originally built for the Chehaskapee in Ohio in 1963. Working the iron today, though, Watco's other unit, number 3516, can be seen as it crosses Depot Creek to collect stored boxcars for the mill. Number 3516 was built for the Pennsylvania Railroad in 1965. The unit would see service on the Penn Central as well as Conrail before going to serve the Palouse River and Coulee City Railroad, whose decals can still be seen on the side of the long hood. Having collected the cars, the crew heads back to the mill to spot them in the staging tracks. Before we depart Toledo, we must first pay a visit to the Yaquina Pacific Railroad Museum. Maintained by dedicated volunteers, the museum houses an expansive collection of unique items pertaining to the line's history, such as these 2 locomotives previously owned by the nearby Georgia Pacific Mill, Baldwin built 282 number 1, known as One Spot, and a 45-ton switcher, known affectionately as Loki. The museum is located near the site of Toledo's long-gone railroad depot, with their office and shop in a resurrected Southern Pacific caboose. Adjacent to this is a Southern Pacific Railway post office car, numbered 5132, whose post office section has been excellently restored to original condition, complete with parcel bags and pigeonholes. In the other half, you will find the museum's extensive archive and library, next to an engaging exhibit that tells of the line's construction under the Willamette Valley and Coast Railroad, driven by the colorful character that was Colonel T.E. Hogue. With the plan to create a port to rival those of San Francisco and Portland, this line's intended destination was not Toledo, but a locality 8 miles to the west called Yaquina, where a terminus and port was built. Bad planning and poor foresight, though, brought an end to this dream, and after several successive name changes and handovers, the line was abandoned west of Toledo in 1936 by the Southern Pacific after they acquired the line in 1907. Today, there are only the remnants of trestle timbers that tell of a line that once existed, along with the Yaquina Bay Road, which was built on top of the original right-of-way. Returning back to present day and to today's successor, we begin our journey eastward. The first leg will take us the 11 miles to Tunnel 24, just past milepost 753. Along the way, we will pass through the small but historically significant locality of Elk City and a location known as Pioneer. We will be following the train on the Elk City Road before peeling off to join Highway 20. The train will have a relatively easy start, with the first part of the line being on the level and not having any notable grade till reaching Pioneer. However, the power will still be needed to keep the train's momentum, as after leaving the yard, the tracks begin to closely follow the river's course, resulting in many sharp curves in the line, and in turn creating drag on the train's wheels as it threads its way up the valley. Just east of Toledo, we are able to catch the train's departure from across the river on the Elk City Road. The crew has already been at work assembling their train in the dark on this cold morning, and now with their train complete, will proceed once a track warrant has been obtained from the dispatcher. As the train departs, it passes the location of Wheeler and the site of the long-gone Wheeler Lumber Company, once served by the railroad. As we can see from above, nothing is left apart from the concrete and asphalt surfaces, with the structures being recent additions. We can also see the spur used by the Western Cascade for loading their cars. Portland and Western's 3002 is leading today's train as it rounds the first major curve. Note the loaded center beam picked up from Wheeler this morning. Now several miles upriver, our train enters another sharp curve, closing in on the small locality of Elk City. In the days of the Southern Pacific, SD7s, 9s, 40s, and 45s all were in regular use on this line. However, the longer wheelbases caused greater wear on the rails, particularly on the tight curves. Subsequently, 6-axle locomotives were banned from the line west of Corvallis, and regular consists now form of multiple 4-axle jeeps. Even for the modest loads such as ours, 5 or 6 locomotives are subsequently required to provide the necessary dynamic braking power for a safe descent from the summit. For the average spotter, however, we are treated to a multiple locomotive spectacular. Elk City was considered by many the first settlement in Lincoln County, where barges would come up the Yaquina River from the river's Pacific estuary, having transferred goods with ocean-going ships for trade within the interior. When the route was originally built by the Willamette Valley and Coast Railroad, it closely followed the wagon trail built from Corvallis to Elk City, which in turn was said to have been built on an old Indian trail through the mountains. A depot here was built by the railroad when the line was laid. However, with the line on the opposite side of the river, a bridge was also necessary in order to reach the town. The original bridge was later replaced with a covered bridge that lasted until 1981, as seen in these pictures, and was in a poor state by then. Sadly, nothing survives of the bridge, as when it was lifted on jacks as part of a restoration project, a strong wind lifted it off into the Yaquina River below, ending any hope of recovery. A boat ramp is today where the bridge would have crossed to a now established clump of trees as our train passes the abandoned depot location. When under the operation of the Southern Pacific, this service became known as the Toledo Hauler. Running as a turn from the Southern Pacific Yard in Eugene, one crew was able to do the whole run within 12 hours. Between Albany and Toledo, the trains were scheduled as numbers 705 and 706, which was carried on by successor Willamette and Pacific Railroad when they took over the line's operation in 1993, using the numbers 75 and 76. In the years under the Portland and Western, the decision was made to reduce the track speed to a blanket 10 miles per hour in order to reduce the likelihood of derailments on the line after several occurred in the early 2000s. This in turn resulted in the time taken for a round trip from Albany being up to 20 hours, thus necessitating the need for 2 crews to complete the run. The first run kept the Toledo Hauler name, with the second part of the run being given the name Toledo Patch, and often referred to as simply Patch by both dispatchers and crew. Nearing milepost 754, the Patch passes an old station location known as Pioneer or Morrison. A short spur once ran north from here, a half a mile along Bear Creek to a quarry that produced building stone and was one of the few branches built by the Willamette Valley and Coast Railroad's successor, the Oregon Pacific Railroad. Stone quarried from here was used in buildings such as the fabled Call Building in San Francisco that was lost in the 1906 earthquake, and the Argonian Building in Portland, which was later demolished in 1950. However, when the fashion for stone buildings was no more, the demand for stone soon dried up, and the last use for the quarry was in providing material used to build the jetties in Yaquina before the branch was abandoned in 1937. Nothing survives today of this small spur, but if one knows where to look, the original right-of-way can still be made out in the undergrowth, as well as an old quarry face hidden deep in the woods, having been gradually reclaimed by nature for over a century. At Pioneer, the line begins to climb, leading into a 0.4% grade, and comes within feet of Elk City Road as it rises on the embankment to milepost 753. Along here, we are treated to an imposing view as number 2315 leads today's train back to Albany. A mile further, and this time we catch one of Portland Western's Mother Mate sets, 3002 and 102, fresh from overhaul as it crosses over the Yaquina River, nearing Tunnel 24. The train continues to wind its way up the grade as it nears Highway 20. Before it does, though, it will pass through the last remaining of 3 tunnels that were part of the line's original construction in the 1870s. Originally referred to as Tunnel Number 1 when built, it was later numbered to 24 after the line came under the Southern Pacific. Before entering the tunnel, our train must first pass over a curved trestle spanning over the Yaquina River. On April 29th in 1895, the original bridge on this site would fail in spectacular fashion when a westbound train was exiting the tunnel and proceeded across the bridge at 12 miles per hour. But as the train crossed the central span, the support vents on each side of the span spread apart, resulting in the train falling through the bridge and into the river below. State investigators revealed several shortcomings in the bridge's construction and in its regular maintenance, among which was the lack of proper bracing required to prevent the vents from spreading in such an event. Killed in the collapse was John Campbell, the conductor, and John Wilcox, who was the head-end brakeman, whose portraits are seen in these images. Since this incident, the bridge has seen several rebuilds over the years until what we see today. Once exiting the tunnel, the train soon approaches the recently built section of Highway 20 at milepost 752. Drivers would have once driven along what is now Crystal Creek Loop between here and Eddyville before the bypass was built in 2016, cutting down on the journey times to and from the Willamette Valley. Atop the highway embankment, we see 3002 leading as the patch rolls under the highway, oblivious to the drivers above. Having passed under Highway 20, the train and us will continue to follow the Yaquina River's course. Over the next 13 miles, we pass through the hamlet of Chitwood and then the town of Eddyville, where we will diverge onto the old Highway 180 to follow the line to Norton's. Just past Trap Creek Road, we are able to see one of the many bridges that carry the line, although this one did not start life as a bridge, but rather a turntable deck, as visible from the chamfered shape on the bottom flange. There are several examples like this one that we will see along the line being repurposed as bridges. This example was brought here from Denison, Texas, being cut down from its original 90-foot length to the current 60-foot span. Around the corner, there are the remains of an old wigwam burner hidden in the trees. However, there is no record of a lumber mill on this site. 2307 leads its train through the site with wheels squealing, reminding us of how tight the curves are on this line, before crossing over another bridge fashioned from a repurposed turntable. This one originating from Tucumcari, New Mexico, the deck was remodeled to the 63-foot span we see here. Emerging from the trees, the rails closely parallel the local road for a short way before entering Chitwood. Since the construction of the bypass, it is easier to observe the train without constant road traffic. Named after Joshua Chitwood, who resided nearby when the line was built, this small hamlet once boasted a station, post office, and general store with a sizable lumber mill just west of the town. Today, Chitwood is essentially a ghost town with none of the town's original structures surviving except the unique 1926-era covered bridge that still connects the site to the old highway. Built by Lincoln County to carry Chitwood Road over the Yaquina River, the bridge was slated to be demolished, but instead was refurbished in 1984 through federal funding, enabling us to still enjoy its rural charm today. Here we are provided with a nice view of the track as the patch carefully makes its way past the local dwellings that occupy the Chitwood town site today. Eddyville, past milepost 748. The line comes within feet of the road once again as they parallel each other through a rock cutting next to the Yaquina River. As mentioned already, 6-axle units are not used on this line, so as per current practice, power generally consists of 5 or 6 general-purpose units, being a mixture of GP38-2s and GP40-2 power. The Portland and Western Railroad's mother and maid sets number 3001 and 101 and 3002 and 102 are also regular power on this run. Having been tested on other parts of the Portland and Western system, it was determined that they were best suited for the Toledo branch, with its low speed limit and undulating track profile. Now on the other side of the rock cutting, we see unit number 3004 emerging on point of this colorful consist for today's train. This is another unique unit on the Portland and Western, which along with 4 other classmates arrived in the early 2000s. Out of the 5 units, 3004 still wears the colors of its previous owner, the St. Lawrence and Atlantic Railroad. Now on the outskirts of Eddyville, we're at milepost 746, and besides a great spot to view the train, this was the location of the original depot, which sat in front of the house that we see here today. A 2-story affair, this was later replaced by a depot closer to what would be the center of town today, although this too is now long gone. The town was named after Israel F. Eddy, who was the postmaster here for a number of years from 1888. Described as a sizable man with unparalleled strength, it was not unknown for him to pick up brawlers by the neck and dunk them in the local horse trough. It's little stories like these that remind us of the many colorful characters that once lived along the railroad. Catch it as it passes by the location of an abandoned lumber mill site before rounding a long curve, crossing over Old Highway 20 and then passing the siding on the east side of town. Eddyville siding is still used by the railroad to store excess cars intended for the pulp mill in Toledo. Cars here are switched out by the Toledo hauler crew on an as-needed basis. Leaving behind civilization once again, the line continues to weave its way up the river valley and our train along with it. Here we find the train at a picturesque location at milepost 743. Over the next 3 miles, the highway and the railroad travel along opposite sides of the river valley, with thick trees in between. A bird's eye view provides us a way to see the train, where visibility on the ground is otherwise obstructed. Milepost 740 brings us once again next to the track as the line passes by some local residences before once again carried over the highway and the adjacent Yaquina River. On the other side of the river bend, the line crosses over once again on a 179-foot trestle. Still sitting in the ballast is an original Southern Pacific concrete water barrel, though clearly not in use anymore. There are several of these along the line, if one knows where to look. Continuing eastward, we arrive where the town of Norton's once stood. Today, you can drive right past it and never know it was here, bar the sign attesting to its existence. The highway crosses over the line here next to where the general store, with post office, was located, as well as a small depot situated just around the curve to the west. In this photo taken from across the valley, we can see the small town nestled below, surrounded by notably barren hills. We can see the railroad passing through the town with boxcars parked by the depot, and in the distance we can make out the small white school building, which was the first recorded school in Lincoln County. Everything in this image is now gone, with the schoolhouse being the sole surviving exception and is now a private dwelling, having now been moved closer to the Norton's town site. Now a ways back from the crossing, we watch as 2315 leads the patch over the highway in Norton. Another view now on the far east side of Norton's. This time, it's 2309 in charge, as the patch passes over the highway once again, with exhaust disturbing the low-lying branches. Leaving Norton's, our next stretch will cover the 10 miles to the line's summit at the town of Summit. For the first 5 miles, the highway closely follows the line until we reach Nashville, affording many viewing opportunities of the Toledo Patch. From Nashville, the highway and railroad will diverge for the respective climbs out of the Yaquina River Valley. From the highway just before milepost 737, we find a long trestle measuring over 300 feet, where we catch our train from both the ground and the air. Costly bridge repairs are hard to avoid with lines such as the Toledo branch, having numerous bridges with timber superstructures. Creosoting the timber does help preserve the wood for a longer period, but in some cases, such as here, the timber is replaced with steel, providing a more economical solution in the long run. As our train works its way through the scenery at the posted 10 miles per hour, it is hard to imagine that this line's original intention was to be a competitive transcontinental rail link from the Pacific coast to Boise, Idaho, with trains climbing over the Cascade Mountains along the route of today's Highway 22 and Santiam Pass. One of the many what-ifs that we will never know. Today's motive power may be emblazoned with the Portland and Western's logos, the Toledo line is still leased and technically operated by the Willamette Pacific Railroad, but under the sister company, the Portland and Western name. The line is operated under a lease agreement with the Union Pacific, with the line originally being leased by the Willamette Pacific from the Southern Pacific in 1993. At milepost 734, we are entering the township of Nashville and the base of the main ascent to the summit. The community derives its name from Wallace Nash, who was the second vice president and legal counsel for the Oregon Pacific Railroad, as well as leading an expedition in 1877 over what would become the route that we see today. Nash would settle in this location, passing away here in 1926. The railroad had a small depot here, roughly where the rock pile is seen today from the Highway 411 road crossing. Just to the left was the location of a turntable, used to turn helper locomotives, as seen here with a pair of Southern Pacific 480s preparing for the next ascent. Also of note is the timber water tower in the background, synonymous with railroads of the West. With the advantage of an aerial photograph of Nashville, we can see the turntable as seen earlier. Behind, we can see the Harmson Lumber Company mill site that was built in the 1940s, lasting until 1966, when the last lumber load was shipped out. Today, nothing much is left of the mill except for what was the sawmill and a wigwam burner, standing either side of the filled-in log pond. We catch the patch as they cross over Highway 411 and begin the 2% grade that the train will now tackle for the next 5 miles to reach the line summit. Highway 411 follows the line a short ways before the line steers away into the first of a series of tight curves up the grade. As the train rounds this curve, it will cross over the Yaquina River for the last time. Just before milepost 732, there is a curved trestle carrying the line around an indent in the hillside and is visible from Highway 180 through the trees. This bridge provides a unique view of eastbound trains charging up the grade and is a well-documented location. Between milepost 732 and 730 was where tunnels numbered 23 and 22 were located. These were originally numbered 2 and 3 when first built by the Willamette Valley and Coast Railroad. The Southern Pacific removed both of them from the line, with Tunnel 23 going first prior to the 1940s. Having a history of problems since its construction, with it being built on a curve through unstable ground, the tunnel was bypassed with a new right-of-way being built around the contour of the hill. The original bore of Tunnel 23 is still visible near where the western portal would have been, with the path of the right-of-way still visible in the undergrowth. As we can see today, most of the original tunnel has since collapsed, as with the eastern portal, which can only be distinguished from its surroundings by the clear signs of subsidence. This new route around the tunnel resulted in the creation of the tightest curve on the entire line. Due to this, a flange greaser was installed here at milepost 732 with the control housing seen just to the right of the tracks as 2307 powers up the grade. Now a little further up the line near milepost 730 was the location of the third tunnel, numbered 22, under the Southern Pacific. After Georgia Pacific constructed their new mill in Toledo in 1957, traffic on the line was greatly increased. In due course, the aging fleet of woodchip cars of the time were substituted with larger and more modern versions that required necessary upgrades to be carried out on the line that resulted in the removal of this tunnel in September of 1962. 198,000 cubic yards of earth was removed and used to fill in two nearby trestles, including one referred to as the Big 60, which was the largest bridge on the line at that time. There were also two smaller trestles bypassed between the two tunnels, Today, the old supports are still visible with their haunting presence in the trees, as seen in this photo. Needless to say, these changes have forever altered the landscape. And from the air, the necessity for these tunnels and bridges becomes clear. We can also make out the now embankment over the location of Bridge 60, and very clearly the stretch of straight track that was once the site of Tunnel 22. Returning to our train, we catch it as the crew perseveres up the now 2.3% grade. Between milepost 730 and Summit, the line passes over Highway 180. We glimpse the train as it passes through the surrounding trees. Arriving full circle, we find ourselves at the appropriately named community of Summit and the highest point on our journey. Here the line passes through a cutting as 3002 leads the train the last few hundred feet to the line's summit. With the passing of this train comes the end of part 1 of our exploration of the Portland & Western's Toledo branch. We hope that you have enjoyed this look into the past, and stay tuned for part 2, where we will continue this journey to Albany. Until then, be sure to subscribe for future content to come, and from all of us at Sidetracked, thank you.